Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. It's just us.
Thank you all for being here and for making it on time. Thank you everyone for showing up the first thing in the morning. We know the traffic's been bad. We have a really interesting group of panelists here today, and we'll be talking about L2, L3s. And I think, since 2019, we've been talking about L1, L2s, and now the narrative and the conversations has been going around to L2s and L3s, right? Why don't we first have everyone start off by introducing themselves, and then we jump right into it. Maybe Marek, you could start.
Sure. It's great to be here, everyone. My name is Marek Olszeski. I'm one of the co-founders of Celo. Maybe just to start off with a fun fact about myself, since we're in Singapore, I was actually born here way back when, so it's a pleasure to be back. I spent 18 years here growing up all the way through end of high school, so it's a real treat. I live in the US now, but yeah, it's always nice to be back. We started Celo about 5 years ago, and I'm sure many of you have heard of Celo. It's an EVM-compatible layer 1. The big news as of recently is that at ECC we announced a proposal to turn Celo into an L2. That was generally really well received, and we had an on-chain governance vote that passed most recently. And so right now, yeah, there's a lot of exciting work turning Celo into an L2. But a lot of really great things are happening on Celo. There's active addresses have been growing by 550% over the last 6 months. We have Uniswap v3 on Celo, Curve on Celo, and keep your eye out for an exciting announcement later today coming from Berlin Blockchain Week. There's a really big company with around 50 to 100 million users that's launching a payment product today on Celo. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. I can't give you any more than that teaser, but definitely keep an eye out for it.
That's direct alpha for you, being in the right time zone. So thank you, Marek. All right, Derek, please go ahead and share us.
So morning all. My name is Derek, and I lead the ecosystem research team at Mantle. Really surprised to see so many people here at 10 a.m. To be honest, speaks volumes of our industry right now.
You guys.
Honestly, yeah.
With the traffic, no less.
Yeah. So a quick nutshell about Mantle. Mantle is the first Ethereum modular rollup, right? And our architecture is not that dissimilar from ETH's plan EIP 4844, right, involving proto-tank sharding, right? And I think how we're going to achieve hyper scalability is via our distinctive 3-layer modular architecture, right, wherein the consensus and settlement layer are on Ethereum, right? The DA layer is powered by EigenLayer via Mantle DA, and Mantle Network is the execution layer itself, right? So we launched mainnet just a while back. Ecosystem is still growing. Very excited for what's to come, and yeah, do keep lookout for us, follow our socials, and keep up to date with our progress, I guess.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Congratulations. And Anurag, please.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Anurag. I'm co-founder of Avail. Avail is a new kind of L1 blockchain that focuses on data availability and not execution, primarily because we are on this L2, L3 panel, which talks about rollups in general, right? So it's a new kind of L1 that focuses on providing scalability to rollups on top. So that's Avail. Previously, I co-founded Polygon back in 2017, and so we began Avail within Polygon in 2020, and we've been building for the last 2.5 years, and we just spun out Avail earlier this year as a separate entity. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nick.
So I'm Nick White. I'm the COO at Celestia Labs, and we're building Celestia, which is the first modular blockchain network. So similar to Avail, it's a new layer 1 that focuses on providing abundant decentralized block space for people to launch rollups. And the core technology that powers it enables really interesting things like the fact that the amount of block space can scale with the number of nodes in the network. It also enables people to verify the blockchain directly on a device like a phone, because we believe that that's something that's very important for decentralization. And so I'm excited to see talk about the L2 revolution, because I think data availability layers like Celestia and Avail are going to be really crucial to securing and scaling rollups.
Yeah, let me throw that question back to you, Nick, and following up what you just said, the L2 revolution, right? Where are we in this kind of narrative for L2, moving from also a monolithic to a modular stack world? And if you agree with that, with all the panelists, and how are you seeing kind of that narrative playing out, and how are you driving it directly at your company?
Well, that's a big question. There's a lot to unpack, and
Yeah.
I'll leave some hopefully for the other panelists to answer. But to me, if we take a step back, there's two primary bottlenecks to scaling blockchains. The first is execution, which is verifying the transactions. And then the second is data availability, which is publishing the transactions. And we've kind of, I wouldn't say we've solved execution, but I'd say we've, like, roll-up technology is the solution. And there are already like numerous roll-up architectures that are live and seem to be working, both Optimistic and ZK. But we haven't yet actually shipped a scalable, decentralized data availability solution. And so I think that's kind of the upcoming transition that we're about to hit with at least the launch of Celestia in a few months. So I'm really excited for that. But more broadly, there's like this modular blockchain revolution happening where people are realizing that there's a new way to build blockchains where you actually separate out the functionality of the chain into separate layers. And that gives developers more scalability, but also importantly, more customizability so that they can build more compelling apps for end users. And so I think we're kind of at the final edge of where the underlying infrastructure of blockchains is going to be good enough to build like compelling applications. So that's really what it's about, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Anurag and Derek and Marek, if you have thoughts.
So, I mean, in general, if you've seen, like, gone through the last 2-3 years, right? Like, roll-ups have been on the rise, right? Like, I mean, it essentially.
Anurag, can you lift up your mic?
Yeah.
It'd be easier.
Is it better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So, I mean, roll-ups have been on the rise in the last 2-3 years, and so what that really means is that the conventional way of doing like a blockchain was, like, get together a set of validators, like build some consensus, like bring up a token and then incentivize those people to run that blockchain, right? Like, now that paradigm is changing from a roll-up perspective, right? Like, a roll-up is primarily another blockchain that runs on top of a base layer blockchain that kind of shares the security of the base layer. And that's Ethereum, kind of pioneered that, in the sense roll-ups first were seen on Ethereum first, right? Like, and now over the last 2-3 years, you've seen Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, ZK, VM, and such, right? Like, I mean, in general, so the shift is from not creating your own execution-focused L1 to a more L2, or, like, if we do layers upon layers, right? Like L3s and so. And we'll get into, like, later if why L3s are narrative. But like, for example, Celo, like, is moving from an L1 architecture to an L2. Mantle themselves, like, launching as an L2. It's essentially because bootstrapping L1 validator set security is a pretty hard problem, and not a lot of people can do it, right? Just look at the Cosmos ecosystem, right? Like, there's so many chains, but so weak security. And so that's kind of the shift that is happening from L1 to L2. And now, I mean, of course, we'll talk about value accrual later, but like this L3. But that's the sort of shift that is happening. And if we assume that rollups are going to be the preferred way to do execution, then like, data availability plays a major role in that.
Yep, thank you. Derek, you have any thoughts there? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking quite a bit about this topic, right, yesterday, and I think there's some harsh truths that I would like to confront, right? And there's no better panel for Giga Chats, to discuss this, right? So whilst I fully agree that it is important to scale the tech stack, right, in ways that moving from monolithic to modular and now to possibly L3s, right? And probably I'll do a quick rundown of, let's say, the VPs, the value props of L3s and modular L1s, right? So modular L1s, the three S's, right? Sovereignty, scalability, and also shared security, right? I mean, they mentioned some of that, so I won't go in depth. It solves for these things as VPs, right? And for L3s, it really is about exponential scaling, because you can't build roll-ups or roll-ups, right? It doesn't work that way. Data compression only happens once, right? So it really is about customizability, right? Customize our scaling. When it comes to, let's say, you can choose to optimize for data compression for certain applications, right? Or customize functionalities, more privacy-focused ones, because L3 really is premised on ZK tag anyway, right? Or you can have also weak trust scaling via validiums, right? So these really are the VPs of I would say L3s and modular L1s, right? But then the harsh truth manifests itself as a question, right? A singular question that I ask myself, right? And I would love to ask everyone here, right? Are we as industry, right, at the application level, facing a hard bottleneck when it comes to the tech stack? Meaning, is there an application that we have identified as perfect PMF fit, right, product market fit, and that we think will be the next, maybe the first proper killer app in Web3, right? But we don't have tech stack to build it out, right? If the answer to that is no, then we have to consider certain things, right? For example, when it comes to the convo of scaling, right, we don't just have to talk about scaling in terms of tech stack, right? We perhaps have to shift the convo as well towards scaling the application stack, right? Because it has to happen in tandem. If not, it risks certain nefarious effects like fragmented liquidity, right? Diluted network effects, right? That he has mentioned. We have seen it in, let's say, Cosmos or stuff like that, right? These are things that we don't want, right? So I'm just want to clarify here. I'm not saying that all these tech stack innovations, right, are not important. They are extremely important, right? But perhaps when we talk about scaling, we have to think about scaling the depth layer as well. I have more to share on that later, but I'll probably save that for later. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. And I think Marek has seen it all, really. So maybe you could share your thoughts on
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot has already been said. So maybe one additional point to make, in addition to, I think, all the benefits of modularity, I think the roll-up scalability architecture, one of the things that gets me really excited about it is the settlement piece and the trust piece. I think if you think about the trust that everyone has to bring to a chain when they're just running on a single monolithic chain, it's if you run the full node, you don't have to trust anybody else because you can verify every transaction on the chain and you know what the current state of the whole blockchain is. If there was a conversation around Cosmos, if you move to that way of scaling blockchains, then suddenly you have to trust, for every chain that you're following, you have to trust all the validators for all the other chains that are sending IBC messages to you because that's the way the IBC is verified. And so suddenly you're trusting all of these different validator sets and you're no longer trusting yourself. One of the really nice things about rollups is it brings you back to a much smaller trust set. If someone's sending you a message from one rollup to another, all you have to do, if both chains are optimistic, all you have to do is trust that there's at least one honest party on each chain that can create fraud proofs if they see any fault. Or if they're ZK chains, all you have to do is trust Moon Math. And that's really elegant. And I think that's why ultimately, obviously Ethereum moved in this direction. That's why we're using rollups for scaling Ethereum. It really is at the core of it, to me, it's about trust minimization.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Marek. And I really want to dive into kind of the recent announcement about you guys kind of moving on to optimism, right? Can you talk about the constraints and the opportunities there by moving on to L2 and kind of on the economic security side a bit more?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the interesting things around being an L1 that's transitioning to an L2 is that, unlike starting a new project, we have existing users, we have existing builders, we have existing node operators. And we have to think about all of these different stakeholders, as we kind of craft, or as we crafted a proposal for the community to consider for this transition. And for us, that meant really optimizing for three things. Number one was low gas fees. Because Celo is really good for payments, you can pay for gas with tokens on Celo. There's a lot of payment use cases, a lot of microfinance use case, UBI use cases, community currency use cases. It was really critical for us to be able to keep gas fees low because otherwise all these use cases would leave the platform. And so that necessitated that we find an Ethereum aligned data availability project that could meet our needs and keep gas fees low. And so that's ultimately why in our proposal we proposed using EigenDA. because it's secured by Ethereum validators. The second big constraint was around decentralization. We have a very diverse and robust validator set running Celo today, with a lot of solo stakers, a lot of big corporates like Google Cloud and Deutsche Telekom and Coinbase. And we wanted to make sure that those folks still had a role. It felt weird to kind of throw all of that away and just move to a centralized sequencer. And so we chose to have a design that uses a decentralized sequencer, where all of these validators effectively will transition to become decentralized sequencers. And then finally, one block finality was really important. So this is something that we offer today. Today, if validators equivocate on a block, they get slashed. That means that we can offer one block finality to our users. This is a little bit different than the way that Ethereum thinks about finality. And so we wanted to have a design, and it's also different from the way that most L2s think about finality. And so we wanted a design that actually preserved that one block finality in the L2. And that meant, again, offering slashing for equivocation, and then also changing the way that the L2 interacts with the L1 a little bit, so that any reorgs in the L1 won't cause a reorg in the L2. And so, yeah, those are the constraints, and we're really stoked about the design that we came up with. We announced it a few months ago, and it was really amazing to see Vitalik coming to the forum and commenting on it, as well as many others. Yeah, it's just full steam ahead now. We're busy building.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think I imagine more blockchains who may be looking for kind of best of both worlds may come and follow what Celo's doing. Derek, I know Mantle just launched a couple months ago. How are you guys thinking about scaling and kind of capturing more users in this market?
Yeah. So the convo of scaling, right? I'll go back to what I mentioned just now, because I think everyone here, they will definitely be sharing about scaling the tech stack. I think they'll be more than adequately covered. So I really want to push forth this narrative, right? I'm arguing for this, that we need to talk about scaling at an application level, right? The reason for that, I'll just give a quick reason. I mentioned the VPs of L3s and modular L1s, right? The thing is, if we don't have the app layer scale in tandem, right, we run the risk of severely diluting network effects and also are really fragmenting the liquidity across the ecosystem, right? And that's something that we really don't want, right? Right now, even monolithic blockchains like Solana, right? Post Fire Dancer, right? They will have industrial capacity throughput, right? That is more than adequate for many applications that are currently in the space, right? Of course, we need to keep pushing the tech stack to to find the next frontier. But I think what I'll argue for is that we need to also pour more attention to the application layer by thinking about the USPs of blockchain technology itself and how we can empower builders, right? Application level builders in this space to do better than what Web2 infrastructure can provide them. And I think one idea or solution I have, right, is to really tap on just blockchain as a database, right? If we can have a huge ecosystem-wide level indexer, right, or social attester, right, where we can necessarily index all on-chain interactions and activities, right, that will give, I think, Web3 application level projects and founders a huge edge, right, over Web2 ones, right? Why? Because then you can have a very informed, right, iterative process. Right now, most projects at the application level, sadly, right, have huge bursts of explosions and then they crash, right? There's no life cycle at all. There's no iteration. Right? I mean, there are many, but most don't really have this process of iteration that Web2 products really must have, right? So if we can use this data from the indexer, from the attester, right, to really scale the application layer, right? I think that we can have more projects finding PMF, product market fit, right? Iterating into that end state, way faster than Web2 projects. And maybe then we can do justice to whatever we're all building here in the tech stack, and to really tap on the throughput that it really fosters. So that is just my 2 cents on the whole concept of scaling. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful and it's really interesting perspective. For Anurag and Nick, you guys are really building the future of modular blockchains. I'm very curious how you guys are thinking about value capture in between the different execution, settlement, DA layers. And I'd love to kind of throw that question later back also to Marek and Derek as well, but I'd love to start with you first. Maybe Nick? Or
Sure. Yeah, So I think there's been a lot of different theories or theses about value capture in crypto generally.
Yep.
I think there are two most common ones. One is the sort of the OG, the fat protocol thesis, which is like, oh, everything will kind of like go down to the base layer, all the value will accrue there. And then there's sort of like the fat app thesis, which is about, you know, the application layers and the applications where the users are like closest are the ones that are going to capture the most value. And I think the reality is somewhere in between, where I think the applications will capture value, but there will also be like the layers of infrastructure that are able to build network effects and are providing a very like useful service as an infrastructure provider will also capture value. So it'll kind of be, to me, similar to what you see in Web 2, where there are infrastructure providers like cloud services like AWS or Azure, and those are very valuable companies, but they're not extracting all the value from the applications that are built on top. It's more like the applications pay them, and but the applications have sort of like their own separate means of being economically sustainable. And so I think that's the beauty of the modular system. Like if you think about where Ethereum is right now, it is kind of extracting an undue amount of value from the applications on top. Like most of the MEV, most of the transaction fee volume all just goes to ETH. And I think the beauty of the modular stack is that applications kind of have more independence and kind of are able to have more of a say. They can, I mean, you can already see this with things like Optimism, Arbitrum, Base. They're actually collecting a lot of their own fee revenue, right? And you can't really do that as a smart contract. And furthermore, there's also the aspect of being able to capture more MEV. When you have your own chain, you can actually kind of build that in to your sort of like state machine, like the logic around capturing MEV. And so I think that's the economic side is going to be a very powerful motivator for people to move off of shared L1s into their own L2s. But they're still going to be paying fees back to the L1 at the end of the day.
Exactly. That's one of the questions that we'll be asking later in another stage panel on the L2 for the L2 panel, L2 founders. Like you're giving about 80% of your revenue to pay for transaction fees, right? How are you guys thinking about that?
Yeah, but see, but that's also an artifact of the fact that Ethereum's block, I'm assuming they're on Ethereum, Ethereum's block space is so limited that the fees necessarily are just super high. But like in a post-Celestia or Avail world where we have scalable data availability, the transaction fees don't need to be so high. I actually like this quote from, I think, Chris Berninsky. He wrote a blog post in 2019 about protocols should be minimally extractive, but globally produced and consumed. And so like, I think the infrastructure layer should be this thin layer and economically should be not trying to extract value, but provide value and maybe like minimally extractive in terms of charge some level of surplus, I guess, on top of the service that they provide.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Anurag?
Yeah, I think, see, this discourse happens too often in the, I mean, because rollups have been implemented on Ethereum, for example, so it happens in the context of Ethereum, the value accrual question. Now, if you look at Ethereum very closely, right, like, I mean, value accrual of Ethereum broadly comes from, you know, like I will like slot it into like, you know, like DA, like paying for DA, charging transaction fees for execution. And at the same time, there's also this whole token economics thing around ultrasound money, right? Like, I mean, so Ethereum is trying to balance these kind of three, you know, like features or narratives at the same time, right? Like, and which are in, you know, like not directly, working together, right? Like you can't have cheap DA with an ultrasound money narrative, for example. So when you see roll-up economics in the context of building on top of Ethereum, at the moment, right? Like, I mean, with its cost structure for now, from a roll-up perspective, right? Like, it seems very expensive, right? Like, I mean, 70 to 90% of roll-up costs today are spent on paying for Ethereum DA, which will go down, let's say after 4844, etc. But essentially, you know, like, the way we think about value accrual will increasingly change as we go forward, right? Like, I mean, when, you know, base layers like Avail and Celestia, for example, launch, which have DA at scale, the roll-up economics changes a lot. in terms of, like how much cost the rollup has to allocate for DA. Because, like Avail has block sizes that can, like scale. Even Celestia has the same thing because we implement this thing called data availability sampling, which we'll not get into too much. But essentially, that whole economics play, the value accrual question will actually change a lot. It also changes because there have been changes in how execution is done, right? Like, I mean, it's no longer re-execution of transactions. There is, like now validity proven or optimistic rollups, for example, and so on, which reduces the cost of running the blockchain itself, right? Like the cost of running a L1 blockchain versus the cost of running a rollup is very different. And so the value accrual, where the value accrual will happen also changes, right? Like, so, like just from a summary, from what we think is, like of course there is value accrual for the DA layer. It may not be as massive as what Ethereum, at the moment, like some estimates, we did some modeling around that. At the moment, rollups pay Ethereum roughly $1,300 per MB in Ethereum DA cost, right? Like, which is massive, right? Like, I mean, and that will of course go down, for example, and so on. But value accrual will stop occurring from those areas, move to other areas, for example, right? Like, so, and in this panel, we are talking about L2, L3s and all that, right? Like, all that is a extension of value accrual, right? Like, I mean, so there's a value accrual on the DA layer, like there's value accrual on the execution layer, right? Like, and now, but most L2s, for example, today, do everything in ETH. They pay for DA in ETH, they have transaction fees in ETH. So where is the value accrual on that? So again, it's going back to ETH. So you will see more innovation there on the rollup side also in terms of, like the native token being paid for fee, L3s being building on top of the L2, for example, and so on, right? Like, so that question will change once the DA landscape also changes.
Yep, that's interesting. Derek, you have thoughts on this?
I think they have covered quite a bit on the tech layer, right? So for me, as I mentioned, I would love to talk more about value accrual on the application layer.
Yep,
so maybe I'll pass it to him first before.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that, but Marek, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think maybe the only thing that might be worth adding is, one observation that a few people in the industry have made recently is, if you think about the types of applications you can build in Web3, you can build, consumer applications, but, you can also build platforms. And folks have tried, blockchain-based platforms in the past, and platforms built as smart contracts on top of these blockchains. And what we've seen is that the ones in the middle have kind of struggled to accrue value. It's really been mostly the end user applications and the blockchains that have really excelled. And so now there's this big almost shift happening in the industry where applications are shifting either more to the consumer level or more to the blockchain level. And so you see protocols like DYDX launching their own L2, or you see applications like Uniswap kind of focusing more on the end user, building a wallet, building more consumer kind of offerings into app.uniswap.org. And I think one thing that's exciting about this kind of modular future is that it presents a really nice opportunity for these types of applications to go more into the blockchain space. And I think that's ultimately good for value accrual.
Thank you for that. I think we don't have much time, so we have maybe one more question for the audience, for the panelists. What are you guys most excited about in the next 6 to 12 months coming out of your project specifically? Maybe we'll start with Marek again.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there was a little bit of talk about product market fit and consumer applications and helping these folks kind of grow. That's been a real core focus of the Celo ecosystem. I think we really work hard to have created a platform that makes it easy for people to build applications that are easy to use for end users. We've made it possible to pay for gas with tokens, even without account abstraction on Celo. We've made it possible to send value to phone numbers on Celo to help application developers tap into the biggest social network in the world, which is the amalgamation of everyone's contact lists on their phones. And we're now making Celo be aligned with Ethereum and part of the most exciting kind of blockchain-based ecosystem, I would say, in Web3. And so for us, what's exciting is seeing these applications flourish. I alluded to this big company that's launching a payment product later today. I'm really excited to see how that plays out. I think payments are like a really amazing use case of blockchains, and I think to date, it's been hard to make them be as useful and as easy to use as they can be, in part because we haven't had some of the features that now Celo is offering. And so I'm really, really excited about that. I think the other part that's really required for payments, especially social payments, is just making it really easy for consumers to be able to on and off ramp into stable coins anywhere in the world. And that's another thing that we're really laser focused on with a project called Fiat Connect. And I think the combination of both these things ultimately will make payments possible in the near term on public blockchains. Social payments, mobile payments, P2P consumer payments. This is what really gets me excited.
Thank you. Derek?
Yep. So I previously proposed a business logic layer on top of the application stack, right? That involves an ecosystem-wide indexer and social attester, right? So at Mantle, I think that's what we are trying to do, right? A first step with this our program called Mantle Journey, right? So we're click, right, to imbue both indexing, of granular on-chain indexing of DeFi protocols and whatnot, right? Together with social attestations, right? To really try to see, what users really want, to enable, to empower protocols, like what he mentioned, to find PMF through identifying their power users, right? And through the process of iteration, right? So that's something that I think I'm really excited for, when it comes to Mantle. Personally, right? I feel, as much as I'm cynical about this whole concept of GameFi on blockchain, right? I think that with something like that, with this scaling layer on an application layer, I think GameFi can find its PMF in Web3, right? Why that's the case? The one gap, right now that we have here is game publishing, right? A lot of Web2 games, they do super well because of, strong game publishers, right? And they can do that because they have a lot of information at hand, right? Within, the Web2 world, right? To have very targeted UA campaigns, user acquisition campaigns, right? That's something that we are still finding a way to have in Web3. And I think a business logic layer like that on top of the app layer can really empower GameFi and SocialFi applications to actually push out to their target audiences in a more focused manner. So yeah, thanks.
That's exciting. Anurag?
Yeah, I mean, the most exciting thing I'm looking forward in the next 6 to 12 months is primarily rollups. Rollups are going to eat everything up. Like right now, EVM rollups are, the in thing right now, but we'll soon get to, like app-specific rollups, not EVM specifically. We have a lot of innovation happening on ZK VMs, non-EVM ZK VMs, for example. So we are very excited about that in general, app-specific rollups in general, and app-specific rollups. And of course, Avail will go to mainnet probably in Q1 next year. So that's what we are.
Awesome. We're looking forward to that. Nick?
Really simple. Mainnet launch
Yep.
for Celestia is coming in the next few months. And I think that's going to be a watershed moment for the industry as it kind of completes our transition to the modular era. And then from then on, we're going to be focused on scaling the underlying block space so we can continue to meet the demand, because there's a wave of new rollups that want to be launched. And I don't see that slowing down. I see that accelerating over the next 12 months. And so we want to position Celestia to be there to supply the market with block space as the modular revolution starts to really pick up steam. And so we're working with teams in the Ethereum ecosystem, Cosmos ecosystem, and lots of teams also natively in the modular ecosystem who are building rollups, building other modular layers to make this whole stack work and get adopted. So.
Yeah, that's super exciting and amazing way to end this panel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let's give it a round of applause for our panelists here today for showing up. And thank you guys for all coming up here today. Really excited about all the scaling happening in infra as well as application layer. So really looking forward to it, and congratulations to all. Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Joyce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.